In this third video, we'll be going over the material for session 3. Now, as always, you can check the description in the video to navigate to those points that you want to go over again. So, in session 2, we discussed attention, the mechanism that selectively focuses on one stimulus in the environment while at the same time trying to ignore the other stimuli. In other words, there's a lot of information in the environment in the form of different stimuli, as well as in the form of features belonging to each of those stimuli, and we need to find a way to properly process only the features of a stimulus that we're interested in. We learned that this ability to deploy attention is rather limited. We can only attend to a few things at the same time. So in other words, attention is like the way we distribute our mind's processing resources. The same way your salary is limited and you have to make choices like, do I go to the movies or do I buy a book? Well, if you spend it on one thing, you can't spend it on another thing. Our mind's resources are exactly the same. And we saw how that works in the attentional blink paradigm. Now, if we strongly focus our attention, we spend too many of our mind's resources on processing the first target, and so we miss the second target. And we learned that emotions can change the way we distribute our attention, and so our processing resources to modulate the attentional blink. We learned that negative emotions make our focus stronger, and so we spend even more resources on target 1, creating an even stronger attentional blink. But positive emotions loosen our focus, so more of our resources are left to process target 2, and that decreases our attentional blink. But now that our attention has selected the appropriate stimuli, we are faced with a different cognitive process. Those stimuli must be kept in working memory and used somehow for our thinking and reasoning. Now, reasoning and memory are very closely linked together. Reasoning is about solving problems, thinking about relationships between concepts, truths and falsehoods, causes and effects. Establishing such relationships requires memory. This is a very early idea and goes back to philosophy of mind. Philosophers like John Locke considered human beings to be blank slates at birth. All our knowledge supposedly came to us through our sensory perception. We then make associations between these sensory experiences, and those associations are kept in mind to be used when thinking and reasoning. Now, the first person to systematically research such associations was the German scientist Hermann Ebbinghaus. He used himself as a sole participant in studies that he designed to learn about memory. He created long lists that he then attempted to memorize. Now, obviously, he couldn't use actual words that already existed, because remembering those words would be affected by prior knowledge about those words. That's why he developed so-called nonsense syllables, and memorized those instead. Eventually, he published a manuscript called On Memory in 1885. Now, as we know, it wouldn't be long before behaviorism would push this line of research into the background. When behaviorism stepped in, psychological research focused on observable learning rather than internal learning of associations. Now, any kind of research on memory, if done at all, was therefore always conducted within the context of observable learning. With the end of behaviorism, the term memory starts popping up again in the scientific literature. A strong catalyst here was the development of computers, pure information processors. In 1961, Newell and Simon, and that's a different Simon than the one from the Simon effect, used computers to simulate thinking and reasoning. More concretely, they simulated problem solving. Problem solving is a kind of thinking and reasoning that is goal-directed, outcome-oriented, reasoning to reach some outcome. Now, like I mentioned throughout my videos regularly, cognitive psychology is about knowledge and information being represented in the mind in order to reach some outcome through our behavior. So simulating problem solving is an excellent way to simulate higher order cognition, like the kind of cognition seen in humans. So what kind of problem solving did they simulate? Well, they programmed computers to play chess. Chess is a difficult game that requires a lot of reasoning. And when playing chess, we of course reason to reach the outcome of winning the game. This was no trivial task. Computer scientists at this time quickly discovered that the learning theories from behaviorism were not enough to simulate intelligent behavior. So what was needed exactly for a computer to win at a game of chess? A game that exemplifies outcome-oriented reasoning? Well, the answer is memory. These computers required large amounts of memory. They needed to store a lot of possible strategies and potential chess positions. In other words, we quickly realized that outcome-oriented behavior relied heavily on memory. Now, memory in humans is a lot more limited and fallible, but we can nonetheless perform at the level of computers with large memories. In order to do that, a human will need to make sense of the situation somehow. You need to be able to see the potential outcomes of the options in your environment. Now, we can see that very clearly in research done with humans playing chess, conducted by researchers like Adriaan de Groot, William Chase, and Herbert Simon, whom I mentioned earlier. Now, in this line of research, people would be shown a very brief flash of a chessboard and then would be asked to recreate the board from memory. Now, expert chess players were far better than amateurs at remembering the board, but only if the positions made sense. If the chess pieces were placed randomly on the board in unlikely or even impossible positions, the experts were no better than the amateurs.
I don't remember if these pawns are white or black. It's pathetic. I think they're black, actually. Some sort of queen here. This is a little bit tricky, actually, because white is just going to win by playing bishop a7, and that sort of dominates everything. So, like, that's why I can't remember where this rook is very well, because the most important thing is this, and this pawn structure, and this is happening. And it's just sort of hard to sort of pay attention to the rest. You sort of get it by trying to understand what's going on quickly. And of course, you chunk things, right? I mean, obviously, these pawns just... But it's, I mean, you chunk things in a normal way. Like, I mean, one person might think this is sort of a structure, but actually, I would think this is more all the pawns like this, and this is a unit. And
now here again, we see that memorization of chess positions for expert human chess players is most accurate when those positions make sense somehow in relationship to some kind of outcome. This line of research on chess simulations led to a long line of increasingly sophisticated chess-playing computers.
The afternoon of May 11th, 1997. Game 6, the deciding game. Deep Blue challenges Kasparov's brain with an array of 256 processors that can examine 200 million possible moves every second. They call it the brute force approach. Kasparov doesn't try, he can't try, to consider every possible move. He knows from experience what's important, and he relies on the human mind's extraordinary ability to recognize and remember patterns. The patterns of chess experience lived in Deep Blue's software too. Grandmasters had coached IBM's programmers to deepen Deep Blue's book, its library of what humans knew from experience about how to win. Deep Blue could now play as well as a grandmaster, with all the benefits of hindsight. In the early moves of Game 6, playing by its book of openings, then in the mid-game analyzing millions of possible scenarios by sheer brute force. Deep Blue has led Kasparov into making a poor move. Kasparov is rattled. He defends what he can, but it's clear that the computer will reliably do what he himself would do. And he recognizes that he has already lost. On Deep Blue's 19th move, the champion resigns. For people watching around the world, it is a slow-motion moment.
Deep Blue has defeated world champion Garry Kasparov in an absolutely stunning...
In the 90s, IBM was able to build a computer called Deep Blue that could beat Garry Kasparov in a series of chess matches. Now, in one of those matches, Deep Blue made a surprising move that threw Kasparov off of his game and eventually led to a victory for IBM and Deep Blue. Now, Kasparov later stated that IBM must have been cheating because the move was too human-like. Now, ironically, it turned out that the move was caused by a bug in Deep Blue's algorithms. But Kasparov's description of that buggy move by Deep Blue as being human-like perhaps hammers in the point that human intelligence is limited and prone to errors. Our fallible nature is maybe what makes us most human. But that fallible nature has characteristics. We are characteristically prone to certain types of errors. Now, we will learn about the kinds of errors that we make in this session. We'll start with reasoning errors in children. A commonly used task to measure the level of reasoning in kids is the balance scale task, developed by Robert Siegler in 1976. Children use one of 4 possible rules to solve the questions in the balance scale task. Rule 1 is only looking at the weights, not the distance. Rule 2 means taking the distance into account as well. Rule 3 users get confused when the situation now is conflicted. They know that they must find some kind of rule, but they don't know exactly what that rule is. And those who apply Rule 4 do know that rule, and so will always get all of the questions right. But most people do not apply Rule 4 unless explicitly taught, and that includes adults. So here we have an example of a trial in the balance scale task. Well, we can take these weights and put them into the containers here to see what will happen. So let's take 2 weights, put them here, and then take 1 weight and put it here. Now, a child that uses Rule 1 only looks at the weights. So he'll look on this side and see, okay, there's 1, 2 weights here. And on the other side, there's only 1 weight. So he will predict that this side goes down. Now, Rule 4 users, for example, will predict that the scale is balanced. How do they predict that the scale is balanced? Well, they sort of multiply the distance by the number of weights. That's Rule 4. So we have a distance of 1 times 2. So on this side, we have 2 units of weight. And on the other side, we have a distance of 1, 2. 2 times 1 is also 2 on the other side. So Rule 4 users will correctly predict that it is balanced. So let's try one more. Let's take two here and put 2 here. Now, if you ask a Rule 1 user, usually very young children, they will, like I said, Rule 1, they'll just look at the weights. So they say 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, Rule 2 users, they take the distance into account as well. So they see that there's 2 here and 2 here as well. But they also notice that the 2 weights on this side are further from the middle than on this side. So in this scenario, Rule 1 users will predict that the scale is balanced, 2 on this side, 2 on this side, but Rule 2 users, who take the distance into account, will correctly predict that this side will go down. And there you go. So what's important here is to remember that we're not just looking at which questions are predicted correctly by the participant, by the child, but also the precise nature of their errors. So let's play a few of these trials using Rule 1, for example. So Rule 1 only looks at the weights. 2, 1, it's going to go this side. And they'll get it wrong. 3 to 1, they'll predict that this side goes down, and they'll get it wrong. Now let's use Rule 4. Rule 4 is multiplication. They always get it right. So 1, 2, 3, 4 times a distance of 1, this is 4. 1, 2. 2 times 2 is 4. So in this scenario, a Rule 4 user would predict that it stays balanced. A Rule 1 user would predict that it goes down this way, to the left. A Rule 2 user would take distance into account, but would be conflicted, as with Rule 3 users. So in this scenario, it's balanced. We got it right. Rule 1 would predict that this side goes down. Rule 2 would be conflicted. They would take distance into account, but they don't really know what goes on here. The same goes for Rule 3. Rule 4 users do know what to do. 1, 2, 3, 4 times 1 is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times 2 is 8. It's going to go down this side. We got it right. Okay, let's do one more. A Rule 1 user would only look at the weights, 2 on this side, 2 on this side, and then predict that it stays balanced. A Rule 2 user would take the distance into account as well, and in this case, they would predict that it goes down like this, to the left. A Rule 3 user would get this one correct as well, and Rule 4 users always get them correct. So we see that reasoning in children has different stages. But does reasoning require good memory? Well, it definitely helps. Maybe some of you will know chess prodigy Magnus Carlsen.
Bort till G3.
Just look at what he's doing.
Bort till löper D2.
Competing against 10 players simultaneously. That in itself is not extraordinary, but Magnus cannot see the boards. He's facing the other way.
Bort 5 6 D4.
So he has to keep track of the positions of 320 pieces blind.
Bort 5 turn B1.
And the number of possible moves, infinite. Magnus comes out on top.
It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Do you have any idea how extraordinary this looks to?
No, it's one of the amazing things in chess that you don't really need a board. You can just keep it.
But it transcends chess. I mean, I just can't fathom what you've just done. It's just, it seems like it's supernatural.
Magnus seemed like a normal enough kid growing up outside Oslo. But wait a minute. When he was 5, he could name almost all the countries in the world, and their capitals, and their populations. Magnus's father, Henrik, didn't think that was terribly unusual.
He did have a good memory and the ability to concentrate for hours at a time on a specific topic, and he seemed to be interested in a lot of things, new things all the time. But I thought that was normal.
They went to Reykjavik, Iceland, which is where Magnus took a leap into legend when he was matched against Garry Kasparov, the Russian, considered by many to be the greatest ever. And how did Magnus prepare? By reading up. Kasparov kept the 13-year-old kid waiting for half an hour, and when he did arrive, he didn't even say hello. It was speed chess, the Formula One of the sport, a race against the clock. Kasparov started slow. Magnus started getting bored.
I sat there for a few seconds and then I thought to myself, you know what, I don't know why he's thinking, but I know what my response is going to be anyway, so I'll just walk off and watch the other games.
Kasparov had never played anyone so young, but he did not exude confidence or happiness, and he did not win. Magnus played him to a draw. It was a sensation. Kasparov left quickly. No nice game, kid. Nothing.
But simply having a large memory, which will help when quickly computing through thousands of possible chess positions, is great when all that a computer is doing is just playing chess. Now, chess is not the ultimate pinnacle of human reasoning. There are many different types of intelligent behavior which go beyond the clear rules of chess. And perhaps one of the best examples of intelligent behavior is language, and the creative use of language. Well, IBM has also spent a lot of time working on computers that can deal with precisely creative use of language.
You just need a little more sun. You don't have this hereditary lack of pigment. Watson.
What is albinism?
Good.
Cambridge for 1600.
Answer, Daily Double. What are you going to wager?
I'll wager $6,435.
I won't ask. I won't ask. Here's the clue for you, Watson. The chapels at Pembroke and Emmanuel colleges were designed by this architect.
Who is Sir Christopher Wren?
You are right, and that adds to your total. $21,035. Go again.
The Art of the Steel for 1600.
In May of 2010, 5 paintings worth $125 million by Braque, Matisse, and 3 others left Paris's museum of this art period. Watson.
What is Picasso?
No, sorry. Ken.
What is Cubism?
No. Brad.
What is Impressionism?
No. The correct response, what is modern art? Modern art. No harm, no foul on that. You each lost the same amount, but Watson retains control of the board.
Hedgehog-podge for 1600.
Answer. Hedgehogs are covered with quills or spines, which are hollow hairs made stiff by this protein. Watson.
What is keratin?
You are right.
The Art of the Steel for 1200.
Answer. The other Daily Double. Watson, what are you going to wager?
1246, please.
1,246. Here is the clue in The Art of the Steel. The ancient lion of Nimrud went missing from this city's National Museum in 2003, along with a lot of other stuff.
I'll take a guess. What is Baghdad?
Even though you were only 32% sure of your response, you are correct.
This is Watson, a large computer which has structured and unstructured information in its memory, and it will easily beat you at a game of Jeopardy.
Who is Bram Stoker and the wager? Hello, 17,973, 41,413, and a two-day total of 77,147. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, that World Vision and the World Community Grid, 2 very worthwhile charities, are each going to benefit with $500,000.
Well, we just seen history made here on KXAN this afternoon. Watson, the supercomputer, wiping the floor with the 2 greatest human champions ever to play Jeopardy.
So you might think, well, okay, that's great, but what's the point? Is there really a use for something like Watson outside of a game show? Well, yes. I mean, like we've seen, the key characteristic to human cognition is that it's limited and fallible.
I believe Watson has the potential to transform many industries.
There's so much content out there. Information overload is really the problem of our day in many ways.
There's lots of data out there. Now the trick is, how do you get intelligence out of it, not just noise?
Most of the data that is available today is unstructured data. It's text, written words, spoken words.
And that's really where Watson comes in.
Consider a human who could read essentially an unlimited number of documents and understand those documents and completely retain all the information in those documents. Now imagine you could ask that person a question. That's essentially what this gives you.
In Jeopardy, built into the game is this notion of confidence. And in the real world, there are lots of problems like that. You don't want your doctor to guess. You want him to have confidence in his answer before he decides to give you a treatment.
Suppose you're a clinician, a doctor, a nurse trying to diagnose a very complex case. You have some ideas, but in order to confirm your hypothesis, you need a lot of information.
The amount of valid, useful information that will make a difference in a patient's life, it just has exploded to the extent that it's impossible to keep up with that. So we need tools that glean the best of that. And most of the data, if you will, on how a patient's doing is in natural language, not coded data. And I think that plays to the strength of Watson.
In seconds, doctors everywhere in the world are going to be able to find out what are the best treatments and how do I ensure best outcomes. That's just one example of how we hope to revolutionize entire industries with this new capability.
So this line of research will in the future help us make better decisions in all areas of life by circumventing our limitations and fallibility. So what exactly about our memory is limited and fallible? To explore this, we use a memory span task. In the memory span task that we did, we learned about two effects. One is the word length effect, and the other is the sound similarity effect. Now, in the model by Baddeley and Hitch, short-term memory is divided into several components. One of those components is the phonological loop. This loop is our short-term memory store for auditory and articulatory information. When we hear things, we can keep looping that information in our mind's ear. Similarly, we can also internally generate phonemes that we can store in the loop, a process called subvocal repetition. In other words, we have an inner voice that can speak into our short-term loop. So if you need to remember a phone number without writing it down, you can use your inner voice to loop through that sequence of numbers over and over. The phonological loop is thought to have a capacity of 2 seconds. So if you can repeat that phone number within those 2 seconds, you'll be fine. But if it takes longer than that, you might not be able to fit the whole number within your loop, and you'll start to forget some of the numbers. Now imagine that you have a list of words to remember instead of numbers. If the list contains only short words, then you might be able to use your inner voice to articulate those words within 2 seconds into your loop and store them all. But you're going to run into trouble when the words start getting longer. Even if the number of words is still the same, so like 5 short words and 5 long words, the list of long words could cause trouble because the time you need to articulate those long words with your inner voice may be longer than 2 seconds. This is the word length effect. You start forgetting long words because not as many will fit in your phonological loop. And it clearly shows that our cognition is limited. So would you be fine if you did articulate it all within 2 seconds? Well, not necessarily. Our cognition is limited, but it's also fallible. In other words, we also tend to make mistakes, even if we're working within the 2-second limit of our loop. So let's say that we have to remember a list of letters. The inner voice articulates phonemes to represent those letters. But letters can often sound the same. B and P are close together in sound in English. So if you're rehearsing a list of letters that includes B, there may be a point when you, by mistake, change the phoneme for B into P. And this is called a phonemic error. And it shows that our cognition is fallible. So in short, we are limited and prone to making errors. And that's why research on these topics is so important, to help us make better decisions in the future in all areas of our life by circumventing our own limitations and errors. Okay, on to the video for session 4.